Welcome to Better Boating in Connecticut. I am your guest host, Yolanda Cooley, and we are here at the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection Marine Headquarters located in Old Lyme, Connecticut. And I'm here today with Captain Eric Lundin, who's in charge of the Eastern District of the EnCon Conservation Police Division. And I'm here with Captain Keith Williams, and he's in charge of the Marine Unit. And the reason why we're here today is we're going to discuss boating accident reconstruction. So, Captain Lundin, can you give me a summary of what a boating accident is in Connecticut that's reportable?
Thank you for having us, Yolanda. Good to talk with you again. In Connecticut, we follow what the Coast Guard requires as far as reportable boating accidents, which basically boil down to 4 different types. They are ones where there's a boat accident, including a fatality, boat accidents where someone disappears as a result of the accident, indicating that they're probably a fatality, serious injury accidents above and beyond first aid of any sort, and then the other 4th type would be property damage of $500 or more to all vessels involved. Now, of course, if any of those types of accidents happen, we want to have people calling to get emergency response right away, especially in the more serious nature, whether it be 911, Coast Guard, VHF, get their local Marine Police, or contact Environmental Conservation Police so we can get a patrol out there and we'll respond to it and assist the people immediately.
So then after the accident scene is, and all the people are taken care of and the scene has been cleared and secured, a report is required to be submitted to the DEEP within 48 hours if there's a death or disappearance, and actually that ends up on my desk. There's a requirement that the state has to report these incidences to the Coast Guard annually because they produce a statistical report of all the boating accidents nationally. And then also the property damage, $500 or more, which is very easy to do when you strike a rock with your stainless steel propeller. That's also a reportable boating accident, and you have 5 days to get that into the state as well. And those forms are available on our website as well as the boater's guide if you need to fill out a report. So, Captain Williams, can you please tell us a little bit about your boating accident reconstruction unit?
Sure. Our boating accident reconstruction unit, otherwise known as our bar routine, is one of our 4 specialized units within our department. And it consists of 8 officers, including myself and Captain Lundin. We go through 2 phases of extensive training, boating accident reconstruction courses that are sponsored by NASBLA, the National Association of Boating Law Administrators. They're both week-long courses. The first course, the basic course, which most of our members have gone through already, consists of basic boating accident reconstruction, getting to know how to recreate an accident, looking for all the particulars as to what goes in to the dynamics of it and how to investigate it. And then furthermore, we go into a more advanced class where we get into vessel-to-vessel collisions, more serious of nature, how to determine path of engagements, angles of impact, and so on and so forth. So very highly trained unit, and any boating accidents that do occur should be reported to us for investigative purposes.
And so what initiates a boating accident reconstruction?
Again, any fatal, our unit's going to respond. Missing persons, we're going to respond. And we'll start the ball rolling with that. We want to get witnesses, accountability for everybody that was involved. We start there, and it's like trying to put the pieces of a puzzle together. So,
If it's a more serious nature, and especially if there's multiple vessels involved or multiple parties involved, our unit will come out and we'll get a number of different folks together because we're going to have a lot of logistics to deal with, trying to secure vessels, contacting witnesses, seeing what else we can gather on scene before we remove any of the vessels.
And so after you respond to an accident, you obviously take care of the injured people. You secure the boat from the water, recover it from the water if it's sunk. You bring it onto shore. Where do you put those boats to investigate?
okay, so sometimes we have the luxury of the boat is remaining on scene of the actual incident, which is good for us, so we can determine pretty much exactly what happened. We can document through GPS coordinates. We can document that. If not, sometimes the boat gets brought in the shore, just because if it's towed in, or if it's at night, what have you. Whoever's doing the initial response out there, whether it be the FD, or another police department or ourselves, sometimes, you know, things dictate otherwise where the boat has to come in the shore. So we have to recreate that at some point. Once we get all the information as to who was involved, and we can sort of determine, you know, some sort of fault, and we start working with information that we have. Once we eliminate the scene issue, we'll bring the boat back for reconstructive purposes to our facility here, and then we can start the whole damage assessment process to the investigation.
These boating accidents are a lot different than car accidents on the highway. Can you kind of tell me how you go about addressing that situation, that scenario on our waters?
They're very much different from motor vehicle accidents. Certainly cars colliding on the roadways, or a car into a highway barrier or tree or something else like that. You've probably got some skid marks, you've got some debris fields, debris from the vehicle, and some other evidence along the way. Here, just think about two boats colliding on the water. Where are you going to have all your evidence? You may have part of a boat that's actually gotten knocked off, and it may be in the water. Good Samaritans may have come and helped some of our people, take them to the hospital, take them to shore so they can be treated. They may pick up pieces of boats and they may go home with somebody. So we're sometimes trying to find days later where parts of boats are. And we hope most of those people on scene are able to bring that together. Also think about the very nature of boating itself. Boats are very fluid and dynamic. They're going to go back and forth. They can operate, they can pitch into the water, stern down, bow down, etc. They can go from side to side, yaw, whichever else, and away it goes. There's a lot of things to consider.
Well, thank you for that. The next thing I want to talk about is what you do with the vessel once it's back here at Marine Headquarters, and how you go about examining it.
Okay, so basically we have a 15-foot smoker craft here that we're going to say was involved in a boating accident. And what we do after we gain all the initial information as to who was on board, length of the vessel, time of the incident, all those things that get factored into the report, we'll do an assessment inside the vessel of all the particulars that were inside. We'll go through all the safety equipment that was on board, where people were sitting. We'll do a whole diagram of positions. Obviously, we're going to try and find out who was operating the vessel. And then we do a baseline offset method for damage assessment. And basically what we do is we start off with a tape measure that goes under the boat. In this case, we're running from stern to bow. We're going to start our measurement as far as the length from stern to bow. And we'll run all of our damage assessment off of that line. We also split the boat into 4 quadrants. We take a line and split it right down the middle of the boat. And we also take another line, a midship, and go across the vessel. And we split these into four quadrants, and they're all labeled. So we start from the starboard bow, and this is our A quadrant. Once we get past midship and we get into the stern portion of the bow on the starboard side, this is our B quadrant. And then we work around the vessel, so on and so forth. So we'll have C quadrant, and then ending up in port bow would be our D quadrant. So if we're going to start, we'll start here at the A quadrant, and we'll do a damage assessment of all the damage that we may see involved in this boating accident. We'll account for all the equipment on board. We'll put that on an inventory form so it's accountable. And then we'll start with any damage. So for here, we're going to say that these scratches that you see here, we're going to label them as A1. We've gone from the actual tip of the bow, and we start working our way down the vessel. And this is the first damage that we're going to see. We're going to note it as A1. So anything else that we see in this quadrant will be labeled A2, A3, so on and so forth until we finish this quadrant and we're satisfied with what we found. Then we'll move on to the B quadrant.
When we do some of these measurements, actually once we've documented something, we'll find out what the damage is, like whatever A1 is, we'll describe it, measure it, and then determine where it is so that we can reproduce that on a diagram. That gets to be part of the report as well.
Yep. As we start working down towards the boat, we were talking a little earlier about how we determine the location. Some of the things that we look for, where's the prop? On this particular boat, the prop's not here. And we've also labeled that as B1. We didn't see any other damage that we needed to document in this section, but we noticed the prop was gone. So we'll go back, and now we're gonna take into effect current, wind direction, speed. If there's a tidal influence, you know, we'll go back to when the incident actually happened and figure out those parameters to try and locate exactly where the incident occurred. So in this case, with the prop missing, you might find scrapes or what have you on rocks. You know, it could have went airborne. We've had vessels go into the woods before where you're looking at scrapes on trees and whatnot. So we'll go back and look for those types of paint transfers or contacts on other debris.
In other accidents we may be looking at, in the case of a propeller, one vessel may have collided through another, and in this case, if you've got a vessel with either metal, fiberglass shards, carpeting, we may be picking up some of those fibers on some of our propellers as well, or other parts of the boat. And so we usually go through and document all of that type of evidence. The main key about the evidence and the documentation of the damage in such a fine detail, going through the different quadrants, is as investigators, we may know kind of what happened and have heard the story from the accident investigator on scene, and who's collected statements from witnesses and gotten some other, maybe now we have video from cell phones, other things that are maybe available. We may be able to eventually go to electronics like a GPS or something else like that, electronic units that are in some of the motors nowadays. But we're going to look at the detailed damage analysis. We're going to look at all that damage and then tell us from the dynamics and from what we've learned from these classes and from some of these advanced accidents where we've actually staged collisions for one boat hitting another. So we know what to expect when certain types of boats hit at different angles. We know what types of damage to look for, so when we see those, we can say that that damage is telling us this boat hit at this angle. This is what happened here, and this is probably how these two boats moved in relation to each other. We want that to come through, that evidence to come through and tell us this is what happened. And then quite often, what's great, then we go back to the officers' reports, the on-scene investigators, the witness statements, and see how they all match up. And quite often, they usually do.
Well, thank you very much. We're going to take a break for a public service announcement, and we'll be right back with you.
We love it.
It's so much fun!
It's exciting.
Esto es vida.
Why do I have to wear a life jacket?
We wear it to be safe.
I've got mine on.
We're teaching our kids about safe boating.
Cogí un pescado así de grande.
We all love this life.
Wear it and love the life. This message brought to you by the National Safe Boating Council.
Welcome back to Better Boating in Connecticut. We are here with Captain Lundin and Captain Williams. Thank you so much for telling us about the Boating Accident Reconstruction Unit. And I'd like to talk a little bit about what you're seeing here in Connecticut as far as accident types.
Well, as you know, Yolanda, you see a lot of the accident reports and the statistics that go on to the Coast Guard. Our numbers here in Connecticut as far as types of accidents and what we experience pretty much mirrors what we see around the country. And of course, a lot of us, the Accident Reconstruction Unit gets called in for serious two-vessel collisions, or a collision versus a tree or a grounding or something else like that with serious injuries and fatalities. But in all honesty, most of the fatalities that we see across the nation and in Connecticut are boats capsizing and people falling overboard and into the water. Before we get into that, that's of course going to lead us towards PFD wear, which I'll get back to in a minute, personal flotation devices. But just as far as boats operating, of course a lot of our accidents in recent years have also included more towed water sports involvement, tubers, people being towed on tubes, people water skiing, also knee boarding, other types of wakeboarding and so forth, very popular. Captain Williams saw that an awful lot out in Lake Candlewood on the western side of the state, one of our most popular lakes. But we also want to say that as far as the boating accidents and the types that we see, we often go down to trying to get the statistics for you and for the Coast Guard, what's our contributing factors for some of those. And one of the things we see quite often when our officers investigate an accident, most often is that the operator doesn't really notice what's going on around them. They're supposed to maintain a proper lookout at all times. And because of what's going on the boat, or because they're just enjoying a nice day, they may not always remember those rules of the road, may not always catch that other boater that's moving. Maybe they're on a personal watercraft or miss seeing another personal watercraft nearby. So as you see, a lot of times we give you, I think, statistics that say improper lookout was the cause of the accident, or I think another one was operator inattention. Yeah, how often do you see that?
It's quite often that I see that come across as a contributing factor of a boating accident.
And that's not just necessarily distracted driving like we see on the roads with vehicles, but it does kind of come to the same thing. It's not, there's so many things to be aware of as you're operating a vessel, whether it be a personal watercraft, if you're even a canoeist or a paddler in a kayak, or you're operating a speedboat or a cabin cruiser. There's so many things to be aware of. And you have to maintain that proper lookout, whether it's you, electronics, or others around. As far as accidents?
A lot of the accidents that we see happen around this time of year with the warmer weather coming. We've had a couple days where it's been 60, almost 70 degrees, and people want to get out of that cabin fever mode, and they want to get on the water. And the issues that we have now, especially with canoers, kayakers, paddle sports enthusiasts, they get into that summer mode, and the water temperature is still around 38, 40 degrees. And they're getting out on the rivers, which are going to start getting swollen with the snow melt this time of year, where Long Island Sound, the water temperature is still in the 40s, and they go out and they forget to put their life jackets on, or they forget to bring them all together, and next thing you know, something goes bad, they capsize, and they have cold water immersion shock, and the next thing you know is we're investigating a drowning, again because they weren't paying attention or lack of experience or knowledge. That spring fever sets in, and that's usually when we're called in for a fatal investigation. So this time of year, just be mindful, the water's cold. Please wear your life jacket at all times. So.
Connecticut does have a mandatory wear as far as life jackets go as well. Do you want to take a look at some of the life jackets that can be worn during those months?
Absolutely. So in any paddle sports, manually propelled vessels, you're required to have your life jacket on from October 1st straight through the end of May. Life jackets, we'll go through the types here, but they all have to be U.S. Coast Guard approved for one. They have to be able to fit the proper size and weight of the individual, and they have to be in serviceable condition, which means if I poke my finger through it, it's no good. And they have to be readily accessible. So those that keep them in the bags under the deck, that's not readily accessible. We see it often and often again where we have boating accidents, and next thing you know, nobody's got a life jacket on because they're still in the plastic bag underneath the deck platform and they can't access them. It's no good if you're not able to get them or wear them. They're no good. Just to go through the types, this is our classic Type 1, designed for open water, out in the ocean type of thing. It's like a traditional vest. It's got two straps that you can tie together once you get on over your shoulders. Very basic. Again, on the inside of the life jacket, it's going to tell you this is for an adult. It'll tell you the type. This is a Type 1, and it will say U.S. Coast Guard approved. Type 1.
So this looks like a life jacket that's on most boats these days.
This is your typical life jacket, your PFD. This is a Type 2. Again, on the back, it'll say Type 2, it'll say U.S. Coast Guard approved, and it usually will say this is an adult universal. Type 2, again, over the neck, around the body, and it clips on here. Type 2. This is your very basic Type 3. This is probably the most common. You'll see this a lot with paddle sports enthusiasts, kayaks, canoes. Again, inside the vest it'll show you U.S. Coast Guard approved. This is an adult large. Again, be mindful of the size of the vest that's required for the individual. Obviously you want a kid's vest for a kid, adult vest for an adult.
A lot of these Type 3s are the ones that have the most differences in sizes and can be fit to adults, children, infants, toddlers. Going to have to be much more able to wear these and use them. Of course, they're pretty much just a flotation aid, so they help you swim on top of the water.
The other thing with life jackets, for age requirements, anybody under the age of 13 has to wear a life jacket at all times. This is just to continue with the life jackets, throwable, 16 feet and over. Have to have a Type 4 throwable device on board as well.
Okay, Coast Guard approval on the back here.
This is an inflatable. These are very popular. They're very comfortable. People that don't like to wear the traditional PFDs should invest in an inflatable PFDs. If this is the only thing that you have on your vessel, just be mindful that these can only be worn by people 16 years of age or older. Anybody under 16 years of age has to wear your normal typical PFD. But again, if this is the only PFD that you have on board, you do have to wear these.
Also on these inflatables, they can't be worn for people who are water skiing, water tubing, or by personal watercraft operators or passengers. Just a reminder as far as what is required by statute for wear. Every boat, there should be a personal flotation device or a life jacket for everybody on board a vessel, properly sized, as we talked about, serviceable condition, as the captain mentioned, whether it be any of these different styles and types. If it is an inflatable, there's a little bit more required as far as wearing it, and it doesn't count if you're under 16 or you're on a personal watercraft or wherever else. Also on a water skiing, towed water sports. Again, we talked about children under 13. When the vessel is underway, they need to be wearing it. Also, I'm trying to remember if there's something else that I've forgotten here.
On
as far as
PWCs,
wears.
adults have to wear their life jackets all the time.
But of course, those are the regulations. That's what we are required by state statutes and regulations, but we certainly hope everybody will wear a life jacket anytime they're out on the water, so that if they do find themselves in some situation where an accident may occur, or they end up in the water when they're not expecting to be, and it's cold water, or even if not, panic can set in, at least they'll have the buoyancy of the life jacket to save them, and will knock some of those drowning fatality numbers down.
Thank you all for what you've done for us, and I appreciate the investigative reports that I see that land on my desk now. I didn't realize how much time and effort went into those reports, so thank you again, and thank you for joining us today, and hopefully everybody has a safe boating season this year, and we'll see you soon.